Hello, this is Joyce Latimer from Virginia Tech. Today we're going to be talking about the timing of configure applications and how that affects pot fill of Echinacea. And this is part of the video series sponsored by Fine and hosted by e-GRO. So as you know, configure does enhance the branching of Echinacea. Typically we're applying 300 to 600 parts per million, 1 to 3 times at 2-week intervals. Make sure you're 2 weeks at least to avoid any phytotoxicity. And we get a very rapid response in Echinacea. In this picture here of White Swan, you can see an increase in the branching after only 2 weeks after treatment. So this increase in branching also results in faster pot fill. So we conducted a study to look at the timing of that application and how it affects branching and pot fill. So we used Echinacea White Swan commercial liners. We treated with a 600 part per million configure spray at the time of planting, basically 1 day after planting, or at 1, 2, 3, or 4 weeks after planting. And we counted the number of branches on these plants on a weekly basis. So one of the important things that I want to point out is that at the end of our study, at 8 weeks after planting, all of the configure applications gave us a significant increase in the number of branches on these plants. Here you can see the full lineup of the plants at 8 weeks after planting at the end of our study. You can see that our control still only had 2 branches per plant. And the increase in branching for our applications of configure ranged from 18.3 for those treated immediately after planting up to about 12 to 13 for those that were treated later. But that's not the story that we want to talk about. Let's look at the plants at 4 weeks after planting. Again, our control only has a little over 1.5 branches per planting on average. But you can see that the plant that was treated immediately after planting already has almost 5, 1 week after planting over 5, and our others are very well branched already. So you can see that we're getting improved pot fill with these earlier applications. Now, it probably is still too early to market these plants simply because of the insufficient root growth. But let's look at these plants at 6 weeks after planting. You have good root growth at this point. They're ready for market. But look at the pot fill difference between the untreated plant and the plant that was treated immediately after planting. We have 3 times the number of branches, almost. But we have a significant improvement in the pot fill. This is a marketable plant. Now, one of the comments that I want to make that we've made a couple of times is that Echinacea is very responsive to configure. In fact, it's one of those plants where we actually increase the capacity of that plant to branch. So this control plant with only 2 branches at 6 weeks after planting is never going to have the same number of branches that the plants that are treated with configure do have. So this is an important plant to be using configure on. So let's just go over the key points for using configure on Echinacea. If you're not already using it, consider using it, but keep these guidelines in mind. Make your first application early. That should be in the liner stage if possible, if you get them in early enough. If not, make them soon after planting. Make your first application immediately after planting, but make sure that the liners are actively growing. They should have at least 2 to 4 new leaves if you're planting overwintered liners. Treat with 300 to 600 parts per million configure. Sometimes you'll see a little bit of puckering with that 600 parts per million. Not typically a problem, but if you have a concern about it, then stay with the lower rates. You'll get almost the same effect. Repeat the application within a week after potting if you're treating liners, but make sure you've got that 2-week interval. That will give you some safety in terms of phytotoxicity. Try to do 2 to 3 applications during your production time to really maximize the effect of the configure on Echinacea. Use the label recommended volume. Make sure you're thoroughly wetting those leaves and the crown with that configure solution. Consider using labeled surfactants if you have any issues with your water. We don't typically use that in our studies and we're getting good results. But if you're commonly using surfactants, you can use those with configure as well. Make sure you're only applying your PGRs under low stress conditions. That's a recommendation we make for all of our plant growth regulators. So in summary, we know that configure increases branching. Start early so that you can maximize the effect on pot fill, but consider that application timing when you're scheduling your plants for market. You may actually have less time on the bench, more profitable plants, and get these out earlier. So keep that in mind when you start scheduling those plants and making those applications. And thanks again to Fine and e-GRO for making these videos possible. Have a great day.